this guidance segment with the 2MK team. Well, assuming my sound is working. So we've had a delay of about 20 minutes and a week, sure, but we are now ready to show off our Rosebot. And despite what I said before about there being a lot of variants, we did manage to get currently a perfect version of something that can be used to show all of the principles, even though we won't necessarily advise that people input every single one of these. If you're not familiar with how our Disc guidance streams normally go, we'll begin by just having the bot play in the background for a while I talk about various things related to Rose herself. And then possibly show off some of the CPU's behaviors and why the bot is different from it and why we need the bot in the first place. Then we'll go into discussing the inputs specifically, anything you need to know about them and the point system, and then into other special stuff you can learn. Normally these streams are a little over an hour. I think I'm going to be able to get that today, unlike some others that tend to go longer just because of the complexity of the character. Rose is not complex in the way that will require a lot of that. So, let's of course get started. This character is a hard character to understand, especially because she's not really quite the same as she was before. Her very basic core strategy, as in why you choose to play this character, is the same as it has more or less always been, but the actual how to do it has shifted because of some changes to her moves in Street Fighter V. I can't say whether or not I specifically agree or disagree with the changes in question, but I can definitely say that it's a little bit more difficult to easily decide whether or not you are going to perform well with this character. Not so hard to decide whether or not she's a character you can play. But this also means from the other side, the people who are training against her, as you're now seeing, the way you get to approach her has some slight changes. Rose is a character that can cover most of the space in front of her fairly easily, and if you decide, at least in the past, that you were going to run away and use your projectiles, she would just absorb these, get meter or other resources, and ignore you until you decided to try to get closer when she gets to play her game plan. If your character has high mobility, she has a lot of good normals. If they have good footsies, her footsies are good enough that you have to care for sure, and definitely she has a lot of relatively easy confirms when you make mistakes, most of which push you back to the spacing that she prefers. This has not changed either. The main thing, therefore, that is gone is I can use projectiles against this character a little more easily now, and she in turn was given something to block movement of people who end up far away from her. So you get to change some of the Rose space control option ideas by knocking down your opponent and then placing the Soul Punish orb out somewhere. She also now can just whiff her anti-air, her big anti-air, without leaving the ground and having to worry about moving closer to the opponent or any of those things. This helps for various reasons, but overall, those are the main things you need to understand. She is now a character that has something she can put on screen to prevent or shift your own approaches and even lock you down somewhat. This is without even getting into the most important thing, which is now her new way of dealing with other people's zoning, is to jump straight up in the air and then Soul Spark. She has air Soul Spark now, and honestly, it doesn't actually change that much about most people's movement toward her, but now that she can no longer absorb things and has a couple more difficult issues with her anti-air, slightly more difficult, you'll find yourself wanting to throw Soul Spark from the ground much less often. If your opponent is sitting quietly, you can put out orbs instead. The only time you really care about throwing out Soul Spark is if you think someone is going to rush at you somehow with a move that is susceptible to projectiles. So there are many fewer matchups where she uses this, and honestly, if you thought that was going to happen and you had time, you would probably still just neutral jump and air Soul Spark. You're really not so worried about anything happening. The bot is of course built up to try to do all of these things if possible. We were able to get a bot that is capable of doing almost all of Rose's stuff, even though sometimes it's rare and sometimes they're out of the sensible timing they might be done. But the core gameplay plan is still in here, as you are now seeing demonstrated. This is going to be one of those bots where you change the V trigger and V skill, partially depending on your own character. And the bot page, available at 2-mk.org later, will detail how we suggest you do this based on your character and most likely the way that your character plays this matchup. You may have your own way, in which case, since the descriptions are long range, high mobility, and power through, you can just decide if you play in one of those ways, even if the character you play isn't listed as what we perceive that character to be. If you are a power through Abigail, even when facing Rose, then you can probably pick power through as a whole thing. The meters for the characters when you're starting are for your own V meter to be set to max start, and for Rose's CA gauge to be set to max start. This bot does not in fact use Rose's CA at any point. We decided it was probably not necessary. She's so good at comboing into it that you don't really benefit from learning to avoid the situation in which she can. She'll just do it whenever she feels like, regardless. So you're more so thinking, well, how can I outmaneuver this character or lock her down so that I never have to worry about this, rather than, okay, well, I'll hopefully not stand right there where she can easily do it. She can do it from so many things, she doesn't care. If you're not familiar with Rose's V skill and V trigger as part of her plans, her V skill, Soul Fortune, is mostly simple. She uses cards to power up sometimes, and then that's it. It can of course be very complex from the mindset of the other player, but as the defender, as the person facing her, you don't care that much. If she happens to hit you, she hits you. Some of them even hit when you're blocking, so Soul Satellite is similar. If she gets the space to safely put it out, she'll do so. Most players will not give you an opening by trying to do it. You probably don't want to risk this too much. And both of her V triggers are more or less built for comboing and occasionally lockdown or escapes, not true mix-ups that you don't really understand at all. At best, you'll get like baited into V reversal when she does Soul Illusion. So you've basically been able to see the performance of the bot. Let's switch to the CPU 7 and then I'll come back to the bot and explain why we have chosen to build the bot the way it is. CPU Rose is not great from our perspective so far. She hits a lot of normals. She obviously does this, confirming into Fate Aura Spark in lots of situations. But she doesn't seem to actually play with any real intentions. Most of the time, because of the interactions between her Soul Spark and her other stuff, Abigail's not the best to show it off, but honestly it even works for Abigail. You can often just jump over her stuff. She can obviously anti-air you, but the anti-air itself, as you've just seen, isn't that strong, even considering that Abigail currently is in, let's call it, Guts mode, and the damage is reduced. You get to play a lot of your own game against CPU Rose, with the main thing she happens to show off and that you can use her for learning being, I am at this spacing, she has hit something that must be disadvantaged, but I can't reach her to punish this. So mostly you just keep on hitting buttons until she has to stop and focus on punishing her soul spiral. You should still focus on punishing her soul spiral the rest of the time too. It's very good to keep in practice for this, even though none of the bot's point systems involve actually doing that. Since she has no wake up defensive options, and the game has quite enough ways of getting around things. For example, this whole throwing Soul Spark repeatedly thing at that range is a terrible idea. Abigail will just use Giant Flip, and Abigail can use Giant Flip regardless of what Rose does unless she's keeping quiet. In other words, as long as you think Rose is going to move at all, you usually have some option to just bypass most of what she's trying to do. You can also note that the CPU seems to have no specific interest in using Air Soul Spark, when it's probably among her better ways of dealing with problems. And while it will backdash out, its spacing isn't the best as far as we can tell from the research we've done into other people playing this character, both high level and at lower level. This CPU kinda stands in the wrong place, so it's not easy to learn a lot. She is definitely capable of showing you things and teaching you things, but she doesn't seem to use many of them that the bot doesn't have. Therefore, you don't really care. It's not as if you have a good reason to do this instead, and I didn't have any good reason to build to go, well, the CPU does this so I don't have to work on it. It's really not necessary. All of the things the CPU does are things you already will need to put in the bot. The only thing you'll probably get is how to deal with her crouch medium kick and forward medium kick, as you're just seeing here. For Abigail, this is easier. Abigail has better reach, can just press back heavy punch and deal with it at least a bit. Other characters have to care, but overall, even at CPU 7, this is not a particularly helpful CPU for. And it was not really one that saved me a lot of figuring out how to get everything into the bot, because everything she relies on was easy to get in anyway and somewhat required. Therefore, as of the end of this round, we'll go back to talking about that. Or at the point where Abigail smashes Rose in the glass. Yes, do it then. So we're going back to the bot and just continuing with what we were doing, with a brief explanation of why the bot is meaningful. Rose has generally in the past used her medium punch for block strings in to get control of situations at close range, and covered a lot of the space in front of her with her soul spiral. It covers a lot of space in all directions. It really is. It looks like a big drill going out in front of her, and it is a big drill going out in front of her. She can use it for anti-airing in certain situations. She can use it to hit with the tip of it and be mostly safe. She can use it to set up situations where you think you can punish it and then hit you with the same medium punch. And it helps her play a lot of her footsie game because she can use her back heavy kick and forward heavy kick a little bit easier, since you can't just walk up to her. If you got to the right spot and you made her do soul spiral and get blocked while you were closer, great. If you weren't, she'll just probably not have any problems getting away from you move and possibly even hit you. She's not quite on the level of evasive hurt boxes, but she's definitely able to do some things. It's possibly that the CPU is just not complex enough because the character is too complex, and This is sort of demonstrated in the bot, as I took quite a while to get all of it. The prototype didn't end up being that different, but it took a long time to confirm everything that was intended and work out which V-triggers should be used and so on. Therefore, we're now going to go into that. And we can go ahead and change character, because demonstrating most of what needs to be demonstrated on Abigail isn't really that important, nor is the long range character setup with the current V skill, Soul Fortune, and V trigger, Soul Dimension, the one I really need to show off more. Instead, we're going to switch to a high mobility character. And for that, I hand it over to our resident high mobility character specialist, and she can play either any of the high mobility characters she likes, because they're all the same for the purposes of discussing and demonstrating this.
Sun Chase Move. Marine Conjure. Marine Conjure. Roll.
Yes, I now wish to test it.
Marine Conjure. Roll.
Yes, I now wish to test it.
So mostly for now, I'll be briefly showing off the inputs and then talking about them while someone else fights. Therefore, her action 1 is the longest input. Let me turn on this. It's so long, in fact, that it takes about that long before it starts to repeat itself. And also this, of course, makes it hard to see all on screen at once, so I may take a little bit to perfect that. So let's talk about the part up until the last bit. This is begun with a forward triple punch, and I'm even going to go into precise detail, especially if you're using a pad, where I think you should put buttons. But, of course, feel free to put them anywhere you like overall. This is just guidance. You'll need a triple punch button. This is really difficult to do without setting a triple punch button. Whatever your heavy punch normally is, if it's on the face, probably put it there, simply because it'll be easiest to remember. Your heavy kick button, again, if it's on the face, put it to your V trigger. If it's not on the face, you might want to put it there, and probably put medium kick or something. You will then need a throw button. If your light button is on the face, it's unlikely, I think, for most people's setup. Definitely put that on there too, and your V skill button should also be there. So you have 4 face buttons: triple punch, V trigger, throw, V skill, then a medium punch on any shoulder button, and then we're going to go into one of the longest and most counterintuitive inputs we have probably ever done. The input will be if hold forward, and for those who are not familiar, you can change the button input on recordings like this to have an interval setting of 1. This will cause the bot to wait for 1 second, but you can hold a direction during this and it will not start the recording until you hit an attack button or change the direction. Then it will begin, immediately. But it will also, if you were holding, in this case forward, you can hold it for as long as you like, and it'll only start recording once you hit the triple punch. But it will take it as if you hit forward triple punch, which is what you want to do. You can find this demonstration on our glossary on our website, 2-mk.org. I will not be demonstrating it now because I don't want to accidentally record over anything. Let's lighten this back up so you can see it. On this current demo, you can't actually see it as a triple punch, and we'll get into why in a moment. That heavy punch, light punch that you can see halfway down the screen is the beginning of the input. So all you have to do is tap the triple punch, tap the V trigger. It helps if you don't have any V meter when you're doing this because it's a little easier to recognize what's happening. So you might want to set your V meter to low while doing the recording. Tap forward once or twice. Some of us will end up tapping it more times than that simply because that's how we input dashes. It does not matter as long as you do it fairly quickly. Toward the end of that dash, tap, not the animation, then quickly tap the throw followed by the V skill. Once again, you're not really trying to put any gaps in between these. You just 1-2 and then dash and then 1-2, with the aim of the second one to be probably before the dash would end normally. The reason for putting it on the face is because you then want to press and hold the medium punch. No directions are required. In fact, you probably don't want to press any of them, as you see here. And it didn't really matter whether or not the throw was held forward. It didn't matter if the V skill was held forward, thankfully. And it doesn't really matter if the medium punch is held forward. But it's more likely that you will have let go of all the buttons and let go of all the directions. Another good thing about this is that it doesn't matter if they're backward, as in if you pressed back 4 on the pad instead. And the reason this is good is because the next thing you need to press is back V trigger. This is to get her back heavy kick, the same way that the first one was to get her forward heavy kick. When she doesn't have meter, these are the moves she will use in this particular input. At the end of all that, you then need to do a quarter circle backward and end the recording instantly, as in do quarter circle back, press options, as if the options button was the thing you needed to start a move. The greatest difficulty is probably that you have to hold the medium punch until the end of all of this. And that is why you don't see the medium punch in the triple punch you're actually hitting as the first part. You see the heavy punch and the light punch, but you don't see the medium punch because if you hold the medium punch until the end of an input, it will count it as continuing to be held on any input where it was pressed as the first frame, which we achieved by using the button input interval 1 thing I mentioned at the beginning. So all of this is super complicated, and unfortunately, if you want her to do most of her moves in the right timings, you can't get away from doing most of this. What you can do, depending on your character, and even depending on the variant, if you can't put in all of this perfectly and it's getting frustrating, one, you could try doing some other input for a while, but if you're stuck and this is the last one, you don't really have to do all of it, and I'll demonstrate why now. The first two inputs and the dash are required. The last input and the quarter circle back are required. Everything in the middle is just there because it's helpful to have. So let's replay it again now and show why. That medium soul punish orb is coming from the negative edge, the release of the medium punch that comes after the triple punch. If you're not familiar with that, you can probably look it up. All you need to know is that as long as you held the medium punch correctly, she'll do this move quite a lot. If you poke her a little bit, you will see that she will dash. And depending on how this dash worked, she will usually do the first thing that registers after the dash input. This is why the dash input requires you to try to hide certain things, otherwise she'll just dash and throw every time. In fact, we don't want her to dash and throw at all in general unless you are really bad at teching dash throws, and if that's the case you should probably be training with Camibot. But it's actually still acceptable, depending on what you need to train, that Rose just always dashes and throws. With this timing what we get is that Rose dashes and does her V skills sometimes, especially if she was doing nothing before the dash. But as you can also see, she often, depending on what else she was doing, has a slight delay, and that slight delay is enough to cause her to change which thing she does at the end of the dash. She sometimes just does raw V skill, which is extremely vulnerable and doesn't help at all. But it's the only good place in the bot to put the raw standing V skill, so that's where we put it. You can experiment with this yourself, but before I derail again, know that if she's doing other things, there's a chance that when she dashes up, she's just going to hit medium punch, and you can't be sure. She can't dash up and throw you, so that's a thing. And you can change it around so that she has that capacity if you want, causing your life to be even more complicated. But Rose doesn't tend to get much out of dash throw because she's not usually actually in range. As you can see here, she tends to dash in spaces and timings where only her light punch or medium punch would reach. If you want to hit a light punch instead because you think it's a better idea, she starts up faster or whatever, that's also fine. The point is that that middle space is variable. We suggest you put a throw, we suggest you put the standing V skill because it's hard to find another space for either of those buttons, either of those inputs. But if you don't care about those things, put in whatever else you think is important. Light punches, light kick, anything else. There's just not a lot else because we put a lot of other things in other places, so this was the spot where variants go in. There's not a lot that Rose could do after a dash that is threatening, and if you don't want her to dash at all for some reason, you can also leave that out. But the problem will be the timing, because then you don't know how long to wait between the two inputs. You can try back dashing, but that's about all I can offer you. When doing this, therefore, you can probably do it without one of those three things, and different variants, for various reasons, will not use one of the three inputs in the middle there. It will not use the throw, it will not use the V skill, or it will not use the medium punch. Chances are the V skill will stay most of the time, but this will depend on your character. After that slog of Action 1, thankfully Action 2 is really easy. It's not so easy to read on the screen, but it's really easy. In fact, let me do this again because it takes a little bit. And I probably should have changed the health, but it's okay for now. There we go. That should probably be clear enough. We're looking near the bottom of the screen now. You can use the same trick with the 1 second delay on button input to get down forward V skill. Fortunately, Rose's down V skill, which is required for various things in Soul Fortune, is activated by down and any diagonal direction as well, so we didn't have to overwork there. This down forward V skill has the difficulty that you need to hold the medium punch part. The easy way to do this is actually to just set, again, a holdable medium punch and just still hit the V skill button. Or even tap the V skill button, probably press the medium punch right after, and then let go of the V skill button. However you choose to do this to make it easiest for yourself is absolutely fine here. The only thing you have to do is hold the medium punch for the whole thing. The much harder part is that you also are going to have to hold that light punch you saw, meaning that probably they both have to be on shoulder buttons, and it can be unfamiliar to press all this. But the directions, the input itself is not super difficult. Down forward, go back to down, and then quarter circle forward to up forward. You can also go all the way to up, it doesn't really matter. And tap punch. The punch can probably be tapped before she actually jumps, as in just quarter circle forward and punch and then go to up forward. There are minor benefits to putting it exactly there. It helps with safe jumps and other things. In general, that up forward is not really going to lead to any jumping. It is there because it helps with one specific escape and some other minor things. But if you realize you just can't get that done, you probably can have this bot work without it altogether. She'll just jump less, and depending on what people normally do against you with Rose, that's fine. She'll just jump less. In this case, therefore, aim for this, but the important part of it is the down forward the down forward V skill, and making sure to hold the medium punch. From there, go to down, quarter circle forward to up, or at least to up forward, tap punch, and again, you must also hold this light punch. It becomes important later. Even though technically you can't see it here because it gets released long before anything else happens. Action 3 is relatively easy. It is another source of throws. And gives you a forward heavy kick right afterwards. You can see here that we ended up plinking the medium kick. This is fine because the important thing here is that you hold the medium kick. It does not really require if the medium kick is pressed along with the heavy kick or not. It just helps her do things like back roll. So if you realize you hit that medium kick fairly late after the heavy kick, it's probably fine because she'll just do a forward medium kick. Sometimes. Most of the time it will be hidden, as in she will animate either a throw or a forward heavy kick, and the forward medium kick will never happen, and that's okay as well. From there, you press up forward. Even if you wiggle a bit, as you see here, it's probably fine. Even if you get to up, still probably fine. The hard part in this is that you have to hold up forward for a little bit. She has to actually either go into the air or you just feel like she's going to be in the air for long enough. And then you quickly do a quarter circle down from where you are. As you see demonstrated there, go to forward, go to down, and end the recording there. Remember, you are holding this medium kick the whole time. This is unfamiliar, but it's not terribly difficult once you've gotten over the hump of why am I doing a quarter circle down for this? This is useful and meant later for getting her to do her soul bind, which is the uppercut motion, and that is also why you are holding the medium kick for this. She normally doesn't do this at any useful times for the most part, but it's good to have it in there in case your character has a bunch of float stuff or does neutral jumps and similar in real setups. This is literally the simplest input. There is nearly no work involved here except timing. You can do this from close enough to make sure that you actually hit with most of it, but for a lot of people this isn't helpful. So I'll just explain it regardless. In this case, you can either hold the light punch or not, but there is no necessarily any light punch The only reason you'd want to do this basically is if you don't want her to throw as many soul sparks. If you want her to throw less soul spark, then you can use the light punch in this way. But it is standing light punch, standing medium punch, crouch medium punch, quarter circle forward. Whether or not you hold the medium punch here is also up to you. I believe that we have it set that you are supposed to hold this medium punch. But note, of course, that you've held medium punches a lot already. It might not be necessary at all. In short, this is not a thing where you spend much time worrying, did I hold a medium punch? You can just re-record it every time and see if she acts differently, and maybe that will give you some variation when you feel as if you've gotten the bot too easy, or just gotten too used to it. When played back, generally she'll just mash buttons here and throw soul sparks. And finally, another relatively simple input. In fact, I can't say that this is requiring much effort at all. It is also the one that if you want to experiment, you normally change things for it. But it is a little complicated in one specific way, so let's look at it. In fact, there we go. This is a down forward heavy kick. And you kind of just mash stuff in there. A down forward heavy kick, light punch, heavy punch, those sorts of things. You can put down forward V trigger if you'd like for various things. It's not as necessary, somehow it seems to work regardless of this a lot of the time. But that might be because this is a really fast plink and I'm working it out as we go. The heavy kick must be held in this case. But as per usual, when we realize we have done a theoretical thing sloppily, we specifically leave it on both the stream and the recordings to demonstrate this can be done with this much leniency. It doesn't have to be precise. You can be very sloppy about this and it still work out fine. So don't push yourself too hard to do it perfectly. Once again, you will use the same technique, button input interval setting 1. Just hold down forward for a bit until it seems to be ready to record. Then hit this heavy kick along with light punch and heavy punch. And then, while holding the heavy kick, do basically almost a 360. Forward, up, forward, up, forward, up, back, back, down, back, and wait a tiny bit of time there, and just stop. If you get all the way to down, it helps. If you get all the way to doing another quarter circle forward, then you get Air Soul Spark, which is what we have done here. If you think Air Soul Spark is not really important in your matchup, don't do it. She'll just block more and you'll be set. And if you think this is something you really care about, make sure to do it. So you are in fact doing an entire 360, slightly more than that because you are going all the way around back to forward, whereas you started at down forward. So just quickly, full 360. You don't have to wait for anything because the amount of time it takes nearly everyone to do a full 360 is almost exactly the amount of time it takes Rose to get to the point where throwing Soul Spark in the air is a good idea. This is the only way to get her to do Air Soul Spark here. It also unlocks almost all of her other jumping attacks. Somehow, still seems to get the timing approximately right, but that might be combinations with other things. and when in combination with other buttons, can cause her to do different soul spark ranges, which is obviously really important. You can also, as you've just seen, determine which soul spark she's going to do by the same thing. If you hit V trigger or plink into heavy punch at the beginning of this input, she will throw the soul spark the full way. So we got to this point of realizing, for our tests, we want her to do light punch soul spark when she jumps more often. So let's hit the light punch along with the heavy kick, and then plink into heavy punch and so on. This is just to get more inputs in there. So the short version is press down forward heavy kick and quickly, while holding the heavy kick, press whatever punch button will do the correct air soul spark for your matchup. If you stand at a spot where the best thing for her to do is medium, you could still just hit another medium punch, but you don't really need to do this too often. Heavy, light, make it work however works for you. And of course, this is the input that for the most part you can change up. It's easy to re-record, it's simple to remember mostly, and you can experiment with it a lot to add in just about anything you consider important. Just know that if you're keeping this whole 360 jump thing, you probably do not want to press a lot of buttons. Well, that was usually not quite as in-depth, but this is one of those characters where, as you're about to see, we need her to do a lot of things. And the only way to get her to do this very large amount of things is to be this precise about many inputs. But now I'm going to start talking about how they work together, and if you want to start modifying things, how to get them to work together. But before that, briefly we're going to go over the point system. And the point system is also based on which type of character you're playing. However, this is relatively easy because at least 3 of the points are the same in all cases, so I'll talk about those first. The first point is to punish or with punish Rose's sweep. With most of our characters, when we tell you punish sweep, it cannot be with punish and still get the point. Rose is a character where you're allowed to take the point for with punishing the sweep. This is partially because Rose's sweep is extremely rare. She has one of the best timings we've probably ever come up with for when she does this move. You will not generally be able to expect Rose to do sweep at all, but she will hit you with it. Which is exactly how we expect most matches to go, even at higher levels. Mainly because, unlike every other character who just hits sweep because they don't seem to have other options, Rose has so many other options that you're going to get swept mainly when you're in the right spacing for it. And the bot, for the most part, will seemingly do that as well. If you are standing at a spot where you won't be hit by much else, then Rose bot will attempt to sweep. So punishing this sweep is a point, and you won't expect to get much off of it because she can go entire rounds as demonstrated here without ever doing it. This is probably fine because she also loses this as one of her main point systems as you go up. It's not hard to do, it's just so rare that it almost doesn't matter. Which means that her medium difficulty is very similar to her easy difficulty, simply because she nearly never does the thing that changes between the two of them. Despite being a complex and advanced bot, her second point system is just to anti-air or air-to-air. This is actually because Rose is a very good safe jumpy character. She has a really long jump, but she also has really good reasons to jump with hitting very short buttons and get in front of you and start to cause trouble from there. Her jump buttons are generally good. Her jump itself is floaty in a way that makes things difficult, because especially if you use grounded anti-airs that don't necessarily reach that high into the air, Rose has the ability to make her body very lateral, and avoid anti-airs of certain types altogether. Similar things for her heavy punch in the air. She does this big swinging motion, but the swinging motion generally doesn't do anything until she gets near the end of it, so it makes early anti-airs hard, and similar things. If she jumps from far enough away and only hits, say, light punch, because she can do this too, you might miss an uppercut because you weren't actually supposed to uppercut at that range, or you were supposed to uppercut really late, depending on your character. And you'll end up getting hurt that way. Air to airs are a little easier, but she doesn't necessarily jump from that spacing, so you still have trouble. Overall, we found that this bot is quite good at getting the jump in, which is something you're going to have to worry about with Rose quite a bit. She does put you at good spaces where if you try to advance, she gets the jump, and then her combos chain into this, letting her knock you away back into that same situation. You should expect to be jumped at a lot in the lower levels, in the bronze and silver levels by Rose players, and honestly, higher level players have good reasons to jump in if they think you over attempt your own anti-airs, because baiting you into anti-airing incorrectly is not that difficult. With her incredibly long jump in crush style attack, you could also end up in a situation where you think that's too far to be a threat to me as a jump in, and then get kicked in approximately the chest. So you really want to be careful about learning to anti-air this character correctly, especially since she's able to cause you to think about so many other things. You can't just hang out and wait for Rose to jump. She'll just not jump and then do like 60 other things. The third point system is simply to counter Rose's use of her V-trigger, whatever V-trigger she's using. If she's teleporting to the other end of you, hit her before she can do anything. If she's using Soul Illusion, and you end up forced to block this move, then try to V-reversal out, try to set up a situation to get out. And if she just does Soul Illusion and you just does it raw as she just did, hit her before she can hit you. That's perfectly fine as well. It's basically Rose gets V-trigger, activates V-trigger, you get probably a point. Now, obviously this is easy to manipulate if you decide, well, I'll just keep on beating her up so she keeps on using V-trigger so that... But this isn't entirely wrong. Even though the bot is still a bot and is not going to defend itself terribly well, playing very offensively against Rose isn't necessarily going to do you much good. We'd suggest, of course, that if you want to learn anything, you don't actually like go in hard on knockdowns. But if you want to play offensive to see how well you can defend against Rose's V-triggers, do that. Because as you've just seen, she has ways around it, and this is partially why the bot has those extra throw inputs. As you can probably guess, when you are using the high mobility characters and facing Soul Illusion, it's more likely that the input required will contain the extra throw, and so on. It can, depending on you, lose the standing V-skill because Soul Satellite at least will come out from crouching V-skill as well. That of course is more complicated stuff and will all be on the bot page. But now we get into demonstrations of other things and what the last point is depending on your character type. We're currently using high mobility. Karine is attempting to fight Rose by movement and footsies. But it doesn't matter if your character's footsies or not. If they're just rapidly, I can get in, I can press buttons, I can do stuff, and that's how high mobility works out for you, that's also fine. So Kage still counts. Technically Alex counts. Rashid counts. the point is that your question is more so, can I move very quickly and possibly avoid things? Not so much, does my character play fast footsies? Footsies can be terrible, or they could be great. And whether or not you have a fireball isn't really as important as whether or not you have to use it. If your character does not really need their fireball to do anything, and can probably play a whole match without it, then they probably also have enough mobility to count under this. If you have a high mobility character, her V skill and V trigger should be set to 2 and 2 as they are here, Soul Satellite and Soul Illusion. And the point system is pretty easy. Counter or evade any Soul Spark in any way other than just jumping over it. This counts both like straight jumping and forward jumping and back jumping. If your character has like a dive kick, it still counts if you dive kick. But the point is that you must get closer to Rose in some way such that she can't anti-air you. And we are not going to be able to have the bot consistently anti-air correctly because she just has too many other things she needs to be doing. So, work on it from there, basically. She'll throw Soul Sparks, and since you are high mobility and probably want to be at footsie range or closer, countering Soul Spark correctly would be much harder than if you were able to hang out at the other end of the screen. She also doesn't have to throw it. If Kansuki Dynasty backs off here to give Rose more chances to use Soul Spark, she can, but she might also just randomly advance. Which is again where the forward dash comes in and so on. But if you have some way to block the attack, special way, like Nash can absorb it. Nash is not counted under this character type, but can. Karine can seppo under it. And similar, if you want to counter it that way, that is still a point you get. This can make it randomly very easy to fight the bot sometimes and get all the 10 points required, but it's also helpful because it still makes you think about things correctly. There are no points for dealing with the Soul Punish Orb, although obviously you should probably put some effort into learning that. And there are no points for perfectly punishing Soul Spiral, but she does it often enough that you would probably benefit from learning, was she close enough for me to actually punish this with my normals or my whatever else? The move is very minus, but you still want to maximize your damage whenever you can. But just to be clear, it is specifically Soul Spark, and yes, Air Soul Sparks do count. That said, you're still not allowed to take the point for Air Soul Spark if you jumped to get it and just hit a normal or something. Again, this is counter or evade and hit. You can, of course, as I said, give yourself points for just standing at the other end of the screen and absorbing it. This is still fine, but we suggest, and the page will reflect this, we suggest making sure that you can actually get an attack off. Not only an attack, but preferably a knockdown. Not every character can do this, so it's up to you how you decide to give yourself the point. All you're aiming for is to get better, and whatever you count as better when you get Soul Spark Attack should probably be what you receive points for. As you can see, Rose will use the Soul Satellite fairly often. Soul Fortune isn't better, and Satellite will often help her more in this type of matchup, so you might expect her to use it more. The bot is not in the best position for it, and this is mainly because there's no good place to put it. Soul Satellite takes so long to put out that the only time you could be reasonably sure that you'd get it is if you were sure you got a knockdown, and of course a bot has no way of knowing that it got a knockdown. But it is in fact quite good, because any person who goes, well, I'm picking Soul Satellite, but you're not giving me time, let me see if I can quickly get this out. It's better to punish that sort of person. It's better to be able to very quickly recognize, oh, I know that move. Let me quickly do this to hit you so that I don't have to deal with the satellite itself. So, while it's usually extremely punishable, and in this current form she may dash up and try to do it in your face, it's still good because it will help you learn to recognize the animation so you can do something about it. Whether or not it will actually be dangerous in real time, hard to say. The bot also will be relatively random about whether or not it actually does good soul illusion strings. I did make sure it has some, but it is randomization and therefore you can't be sure. What it will often do is actually throw you if you try to re-reversal out of a good string too early, because the good string also has the throw in it. Or rather, one of the two good strings has the throw in it and the other one just keeps hitting you, and therefore trying to deal with it is your problem. It's very complicated. Just know that from the perspective of the high mobility character, Rose will come to you, and the point is, all that mobility is likely to cause you to get jumped on, and if you miss your jumps, or rather your anti-airs, it's probably going to be an issue. So that is your heavier focus when you're playing this character type. You might be able to block your way out of it, or just not recognize it's happening in time and have to like just take the damage. But your aim should be, even while all this other stuff is going on, don't miss the anti-air. If you find yourself missing the anti-air too much, especially because you have managed to hit Rose doing other things, or stood really close and went, this is easy because she just is too slow and gets hit easily, just know that she's probably going to jump over your head in those spaces, and will get away with it too. This is another bot situation where the more you successfully anti-air her, the more likely it is that you will reset her rhythm. If you're not familiar with bot rhythms because you haven't used bots a lot, you might be using the wrong one. This is not exactly a bot you start with. But it's possible to fight some of the others and not understand this about bots as a generality. They're generally built such that if you do the things correctly, with most characters, the bot themselves will change rhythm due to the timings of animations and so on to become more dangerous to you. Whatever it is you're doing, it shifts to start to counter that, at least a little bit. And Rosebot is much more so than others in this space. For example, the Maoken hits here